Hello, Board of Directors. I was asked to give this presentation to give you kind of an overview of the next 5 years of our strategic planning and policies and what we're going to do and for implementation. First, I want to talk about the integration of professional discourse, then the breakdown of the first 5 years, kind of grouping years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those different steps of the cybersecurity plan so you can see how it breaks down. Then I'm going to talk about security architecture and solutions, and then the key roles in the organization for this implementation. And then I'm going to get into talking about IT governance and cybersecurity framework. And then specifically some about communication strategies, and then the differences between policy, standards, guidelines, and procedures. And then I'm going to evaluate a couple different cybersecurity frameworks and break down the differences. Integration of professional discourse. Basically, this is kind of a guidance that says cybersecurity technical communication should be clear, concise, and customized to the specific stakeholder or target audience. And then we want to talk about audience analysis, which is, identifying the stakeholders such as the executive leadership team, the IT staff, you guys, the users themselves. And then talk about the writing process, which, we want to use a structured approach with drafts, revision, peer review, just to make sure that we're as concise and accurate with our language as we are trying to communicate. And then we're going to talk about the design elements, about using diagrams and tables and a structured format that will help present data in a clear, understandable manner. For the cybersecurity framework, in year one, we're going to establish a foundation. We're going to do a risk assessment. We're going to initially base that on the NIST cybersecurity framework, and then we're going to go into define the initial security policies and procedures. Basically get something on the books, something that is initial, that can be followed, and we can start and build off of that. And then we're going to implement basic security controls such as industry standard advanced firewalls, antivirus, XDR, which stands for extended detection and response, and then also some access controls. And then, in year one, we're going to make sure that the employees are trained up on cybersecurity best practices. And we're going to deploy basic multi-factor authentication, which in this particular instance would be making sure that our Microsoft 365 tenant, which is our email and our files and log into all of our computers, have that turned on. So that's a big win without a lot of effort to be making sure that some of our specific data is protected. And then we're going to establish an incident response plan so that we can at least be prepared if something does happen in that first year. In years 2 and 3, we're going to start to strengthen that security. We're going to, deploy role-based access controls, and we're going to try to expand. We're going to expand multi-factor authentication to use the Microsoft tenant as a single sign-on, so that the users can use their standard username and password for multiple things and are just granted access to, say, if they had Adobe Acrobat, we can assign that to them, and then they're still using their same credentials, so they don't have to learn something new. They would just log in with their same username and password and are able to continue. But by having those integrated with a single sign-on, that allows us to, in itself, increase our security posture by having fewer logins and things to remember, and we have more control over our own system that we are managing. And then we're going to implement a security information and event management system, or a SIEM, which will allow us to do some continuous monitoring. So that is a key. That continuous monitoring will allow us to see things, when they happen almost immediately and be able to respond to them. And then we're going to regularly test our disaster recovery and incident response plans so that we can always be advancing them, editing them, and making them better. And then we're going to conduct regular penetration testing and security audits. Those pieces are what will allow us to test our systems that are in place. Are we finding any vulnerabilities when we're doing the penetration scans? Are we, if we do a security audit, is there compliance with the policies and things that have been put into place? And then we're going to review our data encryption protocols and enhance those where necessary. And the data protocols are, our encryption technologies, things like that keep our data safe on the laptops when the data is stored there, or even when we're communicating, say, back and forth with a bank or any of our vendors. Years 4 and 5, then we'll start getting even more advanced. We'll start talking about, zero trust architecture, where the authentication happens continually. Every time somebody requests access to some information, it re-verifies them so that there's no, it was fine before. The zero trust system says, no, you need to reestablish and authenticate that. And it uses that in a, not very, it doesn't bother the users. It all happens in the background. Then we're going to review our threat detection and implement AI and automate anything where we can to make some of this monitoring and compliance as easy as possible, so that it's just happening, and we've put in the automated things that allow it to those reports to automatically generate things like that. And then this is where we start talking about, after we've established all of this and we've kind of set our security standard, then we start talking about cybersecurity insurance, and we can potentially transfer some of our liability in the event of a breach over to a third party. That allows us to better control on, any kind of damages that would happen if there was a security breach. And then we're going to review any vendor risk management strategies. So we're going to start working with the vendors and make sure that they're not our weakest link, that we want to make sure that they're complying with our high standards and that they're meeting, the same strict regulations that we are. Now I'm going to talk about security solutions and architecture. For our network security, we're obviously going to do industry standard firewall. We're going to do intrusion detection and prevention, deep packet inspection. Those are all industry standards for, a secure network and built into today's standard firewalls. For endpoint protection on the laptops and different things like that, each of them will have antivirus, anti-malware, and then, EDR, endpoint detection and response. And then for access controls, we're going to utilize identity and access management. This is where that Microsoft 365, if we can, use something like that for a single sign-on, then we're managing that identity management on our side and not relying, say, on Adobe or them to, have good controls. They're passing that information to us, and we're controlling, the admittance or denial. And then we're going to, so another piece with the access control would be the MFA, and then the least privilege principles, which is, around role-based access control and stuff like that. The least privilege is making sure that the person is getting access only to the information that they should be getting access to. There's no reason for an accounts receivable person to have access to mainframe stuff or to facilities. So we just want to make sure that we have those least privilege principles tightened down and following those. And then for data security, we're going to use encryption, we're going to use data loss prevention, and making sure everything is backed up. We're going to put the pieces in place so that if there is some sort of breach, that we have backups and things in place to make sure that we can recover as quickly as possible. And then for monitoring and compliance, I talked about the SIEM solution, where it does that continuous monitoring. And then we're going to, eventually roll into AI and threat monitoring and vulnerability scanning. So the threat monitoring, again, that's a real-time continual process that makes sure that to look for any kind of, anomalies or things like that. And then the vulnerability scanning is what we'll use to continually test our systems to make sure that we're not, the pieces that we've put into place really are protecting us. Next, we're going to talk about key organizational roles. So first of all, we have the executive leadership team, and that includes the CEO and people like you. And then next would be the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO, which, their job is to lead strategy and compliance. And then the IT security team, they implement and manage security measures. They're the ones that are doing the projects and rolling out these procedures and these different projects. And then next would be the compliance officer, which ensures that we are following all applicable rules and regulations and that we are meeting those standards. And then the risk management team, they are going to identify and mitigate any risks or evaluate what is an acceptable risk and different things like that. And lastly, the employees and the end users, those are the everyday usage and making sure that they know that, get them to buy on to comply with all these security protocols and give them the training that's necessary for them to understand why it's important and get them to, buy in. IT governance and cybersecurity framework compliance. So for governance, we want to make sure that we're establishing clear roles, responsibility, and accountability for each of the different pieces. And then for compliance, we want to align with the policies such as HIPAA or HITECH, NIST cybersecurity framework, or the ISO 27001. For risk management, we want to use regular assessments of threats and vulnerabilities and continually to build off of that and make sure that we are adapting as things change. For auditing and reporting, we want to make sure that we're, conducting periodic security reviews and that we are doing these compliance audits to test our systems that we've put into place to make sure that they are, as secure as we think they are. Communication strategies for problem solving. This kind of defines where we want to make sure that our technical reports, we want to make sure we're documenting everything. We want to document all risk assessments, any security incidents, and we want to make sure we're continuing to build our knowledge base so that we can learn off of anything that happens, that, we can move forward and make sure that the knowledge base is updated to the most current standard and the most current information to build off of. For presentations, we want to deliver security updates to you guys, to the stakeholders. We want to make sure that we're giving you these periodic updates through presentations and making sure that you can see exactly where we are. With that, we also want to conduct routine meetings that, the stakeholders and, we want to be able to give you an idea of where we are, but also facilitate discussions and collaboration so that if we're a little off on any kind of expectations or anything, we can make those early alignments as quickly as possible and get back on track and make sure that we don't end up straying too far where it feels like we're getting away from the overall organizational goals. And then for incident response coordination, we're establishing that right now, year one, as we are, to make sure that we can respond to an incident quickly, but we can also utilize that in making sure that there's this efficient response and everybody's getting notified as quickly as possible if we run into anything that we need to address. The difference between policy, standards, guidelines, and procedures are: policies are high-level principles that define security expectations, like an access control policy. These are very high level. They don't get down in the weeds very much. They kind of, do this very high level that allows, that kind of sets the expectations. Standards are mandatory requirements and specifying security measures, such as utilizing AES 512 for all encryption technologies for either communication, data in transit, where you're communicating with the bank or a vendor, or even the laptop. If we're encrypting our laptops, we want to make sure that those are to a high standard to make sure that they're safe. Guidelines, those are recommended best practices. So an example of a guideline would be a complex password guideline. So this would be, say 12 characters. You got to use uppercase, lowercase. We've all seen a lot of that stuff, but it establishes, and does this recommended best practices so that people are, know what's expected of them so that they can, meet that guideline. And then procedures are actual step-by-step, gets really down into the weeds for installation and implementation. And where this is important is it allows lower techs to know that they are meeting any standard for the organization if they follow these directions. An example of this would be a BitLocker encryption procedure, making sure that all of our laptops get encrypted, but also making sure that the encryption key and stuff like that is backed up so that if we ever needed into that system, we would have that access back to it. So it establishes those step-by-step procedure that makes sure that it is falling in line and doing exactly what we need it to do. Going to talk about the evaluation, and we're going to evaluate the differences between cybersecurity frameworks. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's a very flexible and risk-based approach and is very friendly to the medical field where we are. So that makes sense to start with that. It's flexible, and it kind of evaluates the risk first, and then you can do your priorities based on that. ISO 27001 is very structured, and it doesn't leave as much room, at least early on, for being flexible of what's important and doing priorities and different things like that. It has a very structured approach, which is why, as you saw, I mentioned it later on in year 3 and 4, I believe. And that allows us, once we get some of those pieces in place the first year or two with the NIST cybersecurity framework, then you kind of can go on to this, ISO 27001 and follow those more structured approach without missing anything and meeting those requirements. And then the CIS controls, those provide a prioritized set of actions and procedures and continually increase your security posture. So you kind of get these ranked reports of you do this step, then this step, then this step, then this step. And as you do that, you may get less benefit from each step you do because the most important ones are at the top, but you're still moving the needle and you're still increasing the protection. But overall, the NIST cybersecurity framework for a health organization is a great place to start for us. In conclusion, I kind of broke down these first 5 years of the cybersecurity rollout plan. I talked about our key architecture and our security architecture and stuff like that. I explained the roles, governance, and cybersecurity framework. I talked about our communication strategies, and then I explained the differences between policies, standards, guidelines, and procedures. And I finished with, evaluating the differences between the frameworks and why we are starting out with that NIST cybersecurity framework. So please, if you have any questions, reach out to me. This is my email. We can discuss anything that is confusing. We can continue to develop it. It's important for the board of directors to understand where everything is going and understand, and making sure that we're meeting your guys' expectations and staying aligned with the organization. So look forward to continuing to develop this, and I will contact you in the future.